Greetings all, and welcome to the final step to our solution selection process. Thank you all for showing up to participate in this super important work to help our community draw down carbon from our atmosphere. And if you are joining us from Homer, we are on the lands of the Dena'ina people. Tugacht, also meaning beluga, is what the Dena'ina people call this part of the peninsula. So let's just take a moment to remember why we are here, volunteering our time and energy with this group.
Can you turn it up, or is that all?
It is up.
Let's all strive to have an open mind about the different solutions presented and to think critically about their feasibility and impact. We have a champion for each solution, the 10 solutions that our community voted on last month, and they have volunteered to research and present a 5-minute educational analysis on each solution. Each champion filled out a rubric that demonstrates the strengths and weaknesses of their solution, and I will be sharing that in the chat during each presentation. It's an imperfect tool, but it's an additional way that you can assess each solution's effectiveness and achievability. So you can take it or leave it. We encourage you to use the chat function during this meeting for any questions or comments you have during the presentations. There will be an opportunity for discussion in the second half of the meeting, but the chat box will give everybody an opportunity to share their thoughts while keeping the meeting on track time-wise. To get you all situated with using it, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and share what is helping you feel connected to your community down in the chat. And if you have any tech questions or anything like that, feel free to private message me or Satchel and we can help you out. After the presentations, we will head into breakout rooms and give everyone the opportunity to discuss solutions with each other. If you don't have any pressing questions or comments, you can take a break for those 12 minutes. And then we'll come back and have a 15-minute Q&A moderated by Dale, where you can raise your hand and ask specific questions to the presenters. So try to keep them concise. Or you can type your question in the chat. Although we wish we could spend more time discussing each solution more in depth, we do want to respect your time and make sure this meeting stays around 2 hours. After the Q&A, we will vote using a Google form that Satchel will share in the chat, and then we will take the top 2 or 3 solutions voted on that poll and vote one last time. Hopefully, we will have some time after voting to discuss the solution we all decide on, and then we will move to the next stage. This is the stage of action, and we will need members in our community to fill roles for this stage. So please help us turn our solution into a reality by attending our next meeting on Wednesday, November 19th at 6. Also, the Thursday before, on the 12th, at 6 p.m. is the first Resilience and Security Commission's meeting, and it's important for the public to attend to give input and direction to their commission. So at the end of the meeting, I can link information about that event in the chat. Also, election day is coming up, so make sure you have a voting plan. Now, I will pass the mic off to our first presenter of the evening, our first champion. So take it away.
I'm gonna share my screen. Sorry, Dale, you can.
Okay, I'm gonna be the timer. So hopefully all the presenters will stick to right about 5 minutes, and then I'll move on to the next one. And the first one up is Penny. So go ahead, Satchel.
Penny, I think we're just gonna do it like this. I don't know what that sign in was all about, but is this big enough for people? Yeah.
Satchel?
Yes.
My partner's about to barge into the house and I need to like run outside and kick him out. Can someone go before me? It's like a really bad, communication breakdown on my end.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's just jump to Katie then.
Okay.
And Satchel,
Yep.
Satchel, if you hit F5, it just takes the presentation to full screen.
Thank you. Katie, home energy efficiency.
I'm about to give a presentation and
Well, okay. Okay, going on mute.
All right, you ready, Katie?
I think I am ready. Yep. So I'm going to share with you all a little bit. Now our dog is being loud. Nathan, can you take her outside? Sorry. I'm going to share a little bit with you all about some ideas for a low income home energy efficiency project that I'm temporarily calling community powered for fun. And so I want to start out, I guess next slide, Satchel, with talking a little bit about sort of what already exists in some of the communication conversations that I had. So the Alaska Weatherization Assistance Program exists and provides free assessments and audits of homes and apartments, as well as mobile homes and condominiums. And then we'll do weatherization efforts, weather stripping, window replacements, caulking, door replacements, all sorts of things to improve energy efficiency, especially around home heating. And there is an income limit for that. And there is a bit of a wait list depending on kind of whether you fall into a priority care, category or not. But it is out there and there is still funding for it, and it does exist on the Kenai Peninsula. HEA also has a line of credit that's up to a $5,000 loan.
Any interest in sitting in on this?
And
We're
the
discussing
interest
and
rate
options
is
that were
about
created from
4%
Drawdown
to
theories and things that
4.25%.
One of these is going to get picked
And
you and Homer.
then
Not that interested in that thing.
whoever's been on mute, could you possibly mute?
Hey, Nicole, could you mute, please?
Thank you. And then the other thing that I looked into a little bit is the Juneau Carbon Offset Program has an air source heat pump program for low income families. So people pay to offset their carbon emissions and carbon footprint, and then that money goes towards installation of free air source heat pumps for low income families. And so that's a really great model for Juneau. There are definitely some considerations for the Kenai Peninsula that would make that trickier for us. And there may be other things that you all know about that already exist out there. I'd love to hear about them in the chat because this is all about kind of bringing that knowledge together. But looking at what already exists and in conversations with quite a few other people, there does seem to be a gap that definitely could be filled. Next slide, Satchel. Thank you. And so the community powered sort of program would have two different pieces to it. The first is this idea of a kickoff that would create a welcoming, inclusive event for folks with limited incomes to first learn more about existing resources and have help accessing them if they want to, discuss barriers to participation, really focus in on what are the key desires and needs that people have for themselves related to home energy efficiency, and work together to brainstorm potential solutions. And there'd be food and free LED light bulbs and other things to get people coming into that event and really exchanging ideas and getting a read on our community, and especially low income individuals and families. What are they looking for? So we don't just create something that's not actually useful. And then COVID contingency would be a focus more on one-on-one conversations. Next slide, please. And then the second piece of this would be shaped by that first conversation, of course, so there's multiple conversations, but two possible directions that I think we would probably end up going in and just adjusting them based on the conversations would be providing a pool of money to fund small scale energy efficiency projects. And there's a lot of potential sources for the small pool of money. We're talking here like $2,000 or $3,000 probably at first to pilot the project. And then this is one of the weaknesses, is that in all likelihood, the feedback we would get is that this wouldn't work necessarily as a loan program. It would need to be a mini grant program. And so one of the weaknesses is that even though it's a small pool of money, it's not a self-sustaining pool of money. So there'd need to be work to kind of keep that fundraising going. But to kind of minimize the costs, and a really cool potential part of the project would be also to create a team of willing volunteers who are skilled and some more unskilled labor to do a lot of the work, and that it could actually include an informal apprenticeship program so that young people and others who are interested could build these skills to get involved in the green technology and home energy efficiency industries. Next slide, please, Satchel. And so there are some core benefits. This project directly addresses inequities, especially economic inequities. It broadens participation and discussion around climate change mitigation. There is a huge diversity of roles to get involved, whether it's making food, installing insulation, fundraising, communicating with people, lots of different roles involved. And it provides mechanisms for improving existing programs through those community conversations and getting people engaged and trying to address some of those barriers and creating something new that fills a gap. There are many opportunities to learn together and build relationships, which will allow us to kind of continue this momentum and bring more people in and be a healthier, stronger, climate resilient community in the future. And it has significant possibility to reduce carbon emissions. Some of the types of home projects that could be funded through this or supported through this are among the top solutions proposed in Drawdown. So it really could have some measurable impacts with pretty limited financial investment. And then
Hey, Katie, try to wrap it up, please.
Yep. On the last slide, whether or not you choose this solution, there are a few things that you can do now or soon. So HEA is open to hearing more about some of the barriers in their line of credit and adjusting them. So let me know if you know of any barriers. Spread the word about the Alaska Weatherization Assistance Project. I'm going to drop a little picture in the chat that you all can use to share with folks about that. If you're excited about on-bill financing, advocate for it. I think Louis Flores is here tonight. He can tell you more about it. And if you're interested in the offset program, you can donate directly to the Juneau offset program. Thank you all and have a great night.
Awesome, thank you. We are gonna have time for questions later. So for now, we'll just keep moving through these. Penny, are you ready with yours?
Could I have another, I'll be the person after the next
Sure.
person?
Bjorn, are you all set?
Yep. Satchel, do you have my slides? I don't really actually need them so much, but if they're available.
All you.
So I didn't realize when I took on the food waste solution that I was going to find such great low-hanging fruit. And so my project, it has the hallmark of being fairly simple and fairly straightforward. And so my presentation is short too, but I don't have a clever name yet. So open to all ears if anybody has any great ideas. So nearly 1/3 of the food our civilization produces is wasted. This waste accounts for roughly 8% of our total greenhouse gas emissions. Behind onshore wind and refrigerant management, Drawdown ranks addressing food waste as the third most significant solution for a stable climate system. But what can we do about it? Next slide, please. Here in Homer, we are charmed to have many entities already working to solve this problem, but I believe there are a few novel ways our group could meaningfully address food waste. As is likely the case with each of the proposed solutions we will hear about tonight, education and outreach are intrinsic to these solutions, and this one is no different. Although there appear to be many areas that we could choose to focus our attention, I will speak primarily about just one: shelf-stable and freezer-ready food preservation. We have in our community a fantastic resource and a potent ally, Cold Point Seafood Company and its owner, Nancy Hillstrand, who is happy to work with our group to address food waste in Homer. Cold Point is now able to preserve shelf-stable food by way of a semi-industrial scale canner. The company is also able to blanch and vacuum seal vegetables on a large scale as well. With this in mind, I'm proposing that Homer Drawdown coordinate with Cold Point Seafood to improve their food preservation capacity, which will help keep local food out of the waste stream. Our group could provide a variety of services to this end. Number one, educate gardeners and other small-scale local food producers about the blanching and vac sealing operation. 2, educate sport, recreational, and personal use fisherfolk about the canning operation, with special emphasis added to spring/early summer before the new fishing season begins and when people are looking to clear out their freezers. 3, educate hunters about the canning operation. 4, organize a volunteer workforce that is trained to operate aforementioned equipment at Cold Point to reduce costs of processing and alleviate workload on Cold Point's staff. 5, apply for grants and or fundraise to subsidize cost of food preservation for low-income households. 6, identify and intercept local food before it enters into the waste stream and preserve it. For example, McNeil Meats produces a tremendous amount of waste that ends up at the transfer station during fall moose hunting season. And lastly, 7, strengthen relationships and assist other food/food waste efforts already being developed in our community. Next slide. Although many of these opportunities will be challenging during a pandemic, I believe a lot of the tasks will be both rewarding and engaging while also being inclusive. Preserving food and keeping it out of the landfill is nonpartisan. I believe we can have a significant positive impact for the climate with this solution, while also reaching outside of our echo chamber. Everyone loves food and everyone despises unnecessary waste. And that is the end of my presentation.
All right, awesome. That is an exciting one, Bjorn. Is there, we were gonna do like, Satchel, if you did hear anything that needed clarification, we have a few seconds, otherwise we'll hold the questions till later. Adele, hearing none. Adele, you will go next, and then we'll move to Penny after that.
Okay, thanks. The solution I'm championing is non-motorized transportation. So this started out as organizing for walking and bikeability improvements here in town. And those are kind of middle of the scale in the drawdown. You have walkable cities at 54 and bike infrastructure at 59. And then there's also kind of tie-ins to electric bikes. I just took an electric bike ride this morning. It was very, very fun. And there are also connections kind of with mass transit and ride sharing. You know, walking and biking are sort of the core of having a different transportation system that's not built around the car. And the other thing I'll mention a little bit is just afforestation. And that's basically, there's 2 ways that walking and biking improve or take carbon out. One is actually not burning gasoline in a car and just using, you know, your own body to move around. And the other is not committing land to car infrastructure, parking lots, roads, driveways, garages, so on and so forth. So even here in this picture, all of that could have been forest, but it is 2 lanes and a lovely bike trail. What makes a place walkable and bikeable? This is kind of a very complex problem. You know, it's 100 years of building for cars and all of the many decisions that we've made as a result of that kind of guiding principle. And it's not just building sidewalks, it's really about a culture of walking and biking. Trips need to be useful, safe, comfortable, interesting, and also normal. Sometimes when you go, like I grew up in Houston, Texas, you were a really weird person if you were caught on foot. Next slide, please. So I organized this presentation kind of on what this group would do. There's a lot of components to sort of changing the culture and infrastructure to make it a more walkable and bikeable community. One thing is finding data, you know, how many cars do we have? How many people already walk now? There are a number of ways you can sort of look at these problems to assess and plan for change. They might be, this is the map that we use to extend the sidewalk from West Homer Elementary up to Soundview to kind of connect sidewalks. That's one way that people can get involved. There's a really interesting Walk Your City campaign that you put quick places and they print out these quick signs and it says 10 minutes from K-Bay to Two Sisters, that you help people really orient about and rethink about how to use their space. And then there's kind of individual projects. This is a picture here of the middle school where a sidewalk just abruptly ends and doesn't get to the front door of the middle school. Next slide, please. Other efforts are about education. This is the Homer Shares the Road campaign that the Homer Cycling Club championed a few years ago. It's actually, you know, really talking, it's whether it's teaching people walking and biking skills or driver safety campaigns, and then communicating the real impact of cars. Education campaigns can look like walking maps, they can look like pamphlets, they can look like newsletters, they can look like social media campaigns. Next slide. And those kind of tie into encouragement efforts. part of, if you go down to downtown Pioneer, there are sidewalks and there is a hefty shoulder and there isn't horrible traffic, but you still don't see people really there congregating and using the walking and biking infrastructure. In part, it's not really our culture, and in part, there's other things that are that prohibit, that make people not want to walk and bike. But you can chip away at that. You have encouragement programs. May is Bike Month, Bike to School weeks. You can make efforts towards kids, towards teenagers, towards seniors. We have a lot of kind of health activities here in town. Next slide, please. So those are ways that a lot of people could get involved in kind of small projects. And then you get to sort of some of when people think about improving the walking and biking infrastructure, they think building sidewalks, building trails, but that's really only a small part of it. We in Homer are really lucky. There's actually money already dedicated to walking and biking infrastructure through the Heart Fund. But what it really lacks is community push and effort. We have a really, I think a city council and a lot of city staff that are amenable to these changes, but you have to have that kind of that community prioritization, that kind of overall organization. And so in addition to actually advocating for this sidewalk connection, that bike trail, this trail connection, there's also a lot of other things that people can do individually. Part of the reason that we don't walk in downtown Pioneer is that a lot of it is really unattractive. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't look interesting. There's not points of interest. There are no places to stop. So a lot of small scale projects are parklets, murals, gardens, benches, and then really key components. If you have a sidewalk that ends here and begins over there, connecting that, or finding where you have trail segments and then really working to connect those together. Because what you want is a connected system that lets people transport themselves without motor vehicles from as far away as people live to as far away as they want to get. Next slide,
Dale,
please.
could you try to finish in about a minute here? Thank you.
Yeah, we'll go really fast. Policy changes are another thing to do, parking minimums or rather than parking maximums, working with law enforcement. Next slide, please. Codes, zonings. What can we do in a year? There's a lot of things. There are a lot of little pieces to chip away at that. There's a sidewalk to the senior center would be a really easy win. A striping plan, renewed bike to school and bike to work efforts. We have a lot of infrastructure in terms of city and nonprofit groups here. And it's really just a question of which are the most achievable projects in 1 year and what can we do. One more slide. Other reasons to do it: economic benefits, environmental benefits, general health and safety, or mental and physical health for people, creating community and public space, and then just the equity of being able to walk outside rather than having to pay car insurance every year. And I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Adele. That's another exciting solution. This is going to be a tough choice. Next up, we have Penny. Are you ready, Penny?
I am. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. It's all yours.
All right. So my project is a utility scale wind. So this project, it starts out small, but it can blossom and bloom into something quite significant and exciting. Next slide. Next slide. Yep. Okay. So over here on the left, I can't control my mouse, but what you want your eye to draw to is those purple squares, red squares, and blue squares. That's showing you where you've got wind at 8 meters per second at 80 meters in height. That's kind of what you're looking for when you want to put in a utility scale turbine. So you can see what's awesome is we do have some pretty good wind over there by Bradley Lake. Bradley Lake, if people look on the map on the southern side of the bay, go to that northernmost portion of the bay and look at that little notch. Bradley Lake is back in there. And so anyhow, right by Bradley, we've got potential for utility scale wind. And I've just talked to some of the board members of HEA. They are aware of it. It's on their radar. They actually recently have started to look into it a little bit. So this would not be a project that would be reinventing the wheel. I think it would necessarily involve some partnerships, and that would be really good. Part of it is just working right alongside and supporting and pushing HEA, working with the Alaska Energy Authority, working with the university. This would be a collaborative project for sure. We're talking about some pretty significant, like in terms of the project, if we are just trying to figure out what the wind speed is doing, it's not that expensive necessarily right away, but the whole project might wind up costing something like $90 million. And so having everything lined out just right at the beginning would be quite important, because this is sort of the first step. So we really need to have the technical side. You can't just slapdash that. There's a lot of research that we would be doing alongside of professionals and, in collaboration with folks. Next slide. As you can see on this chart, there's a whole process involved in getting a utility scale wind project up and going. What we're looking at is on the far left, prospecting. That's really kind of getting what we saw on the last slide is sort of just a very rough ballpark idea. We want some pretty precise data, which takes a year to get, a year of data collection to really find out what your wind is doing, how variable it is and whatever. But before you do that, we would need to have conversations with the landowners who around Bradley is DNR. So there's the whole piece of conversations with DNR about access. Then there's the piece about really figuring out the technical side of where are these turbines going to go. Then there's the piece of installing those turbines. And then there's the piece of installing the turbines and then, not the turbines, installing the monitors and then maintaining them and checking them and keeping track of the data. And then there's the piece of, next slide, Satchel, of talking to folks who might be opposed to the project or getting out in front of any potential opposition. There's a lot of not in my backyardism that has happened with wind, and there are a lot of wind turbines up there, so don't get me wrong, people do like them and accept them, but I think communicating with people through art installations, information meetings, science presentations, getting schools involved. There's just a whole lot of community connectivity that I think would need to happen for this to really move through nicely. Next slide. This is a picture of Bradley Lake, so you can kind of get a visual of what the area is like. It's remote, so it would be, if you were to be servicing a wind monitor in this region, it's going to be taking a boat across Kachemak Bay, climbing up in there. It's going to be there's going to be this exciting sort of outdoor adventurism, technological fun stuff, scooping snow off of the area, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. You can kind of see, this is a Google Earth image of the region. And if you look at either side of Bradley Lake on the southern side or in the image on the right, there's that plateau area there. That's one potential. Then there's a ridge on the left. That's another potential area. And then actually HEA was looking at the area in the foreground as a potential site. So as you can see, it would take some getting out there to do it, but pretty beautiful country and could be a ton of fun, I think. Next slide. This is a map of the land ownership. Just wanted to, so like one big piece of this is really, the permission piece of, this land, these little boxes all around the lake are owned by DNR. And I'm pretty sure that's where we would want it to be. These bigger squares over here on the southern part, that's federal land. And I don't think that we would have, it'd be a lot more complicated to get to it. Okay, next slide. So this is an image of a couple of the options for what would we be monitoring the wind with. I'm just going to focus on the one that from my research that I think is the most likely one, which is the LiDAR, which is the thing on the far right. It's a pretty small little thing and you can just set it up without too much complications. You don't need permits and everything like that, like you would for a giant met mast, which you see on the left. you can just set it down there. But as you could imagine, it could get buried in the snow. It also needs power. It needs a generator along with it. And
Excuse me,
so
Penny,
that's,
try to finish up in a minute, okay?
yes. But you see that it's expensive, but Alaska Energy Authority, I'm pretty sure, I haven't spoken with them directly, but from talking with HEA board members and some other folks, they have this LiDAR equipment available for us, not necessarily for free, but for rent or possibly for free. Next slide. And this is just kind of to help you visualize like what we could do. It's like really exciting to me. 25 megawatts of wind, which is like 12 utility scale turbines. It costs a lot of money, but if Biden wins, we could maybe get some good money for cheap. And we could make a big dent, maybe 2% of our all total energy production on the HEA service area. That's it.
Awesome, thank you very much. I wish everyone had like 15 minutes, but we just can't go till that long. I think it is Carly is next. Carly, are you ready?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. It is all you.
Okay, sorry, I just need to find, got it. Okay.
All right. Hi, all. I'm Carly, and I'm here to talk about getting girls outside. Next slide. I'm pretty sure we're all here and talking about these solutions because we know that climate change is happening, and we hope we can make a positive difference. We also all know that protecting life on this planet can feel hopeless sometimes. We've heard about the feedback loops that make it seem like no matter how much carbon we draw down, it's maybe too late to stop cataclysmic changes occurring on our planet. Next slide. You've probably also heard that as these natural disasters continue to spread and grow in severity, women and minorities are more vulnerable to them. In a meta-analysis of over 100 research papers and social service reports by Fothergill and in Interson's detailed monograph in which she reviews disaster and emergency management practice in the United States, they find that women are more vulnerable to disaster. Next slide. I love the hopeful tune of Drawdown. I love the idea of making a tangible difference to protect our community and better our planet with all of you. I think environmental education for girls is a great solution because it's not just about empowering and educating girls and encouraging them to be thoughtful and caring stewards of our planet, which Drawdown demonstrates is one of the most effective methods of carbon drawdown. It's also about promoting resiliency and protecting our girls so they're less vulnerable and more ready for the changes to come. No matter what happens in the future, it's a solution that will make a tangible difference in the lives of the girls we share our knowledge with. And it will allow for another, more prepared generation to continue having these kinds of conversations and to continue working as a community to protect and support each other and the planet. Next slide, please. In this community, we are fortunate to already have multiple programs working to connect and educate young people with the natural world. These programs include Howl, Coastal Studies, Project Grad, and other wilderness skills programs. These programs are always grateful for money and volunteers, and it would be amazing to work with you all and help revitalize them, especially after multiple programs had to be put on hold due to COVID last summer. We could also work on a project to facilitate networking between the groups and expand their relations and involvement with the Homer community. We could even potentially work on creating our own program or creating a program through and with one of these groups. I've spoken with multiple locals who are interested in sharing the sacred wild places they've come to love and care for across the bay with young people. There are opportunities for many different volunteers, educators of various skills, curriculum creators. If you're uninterested in working with kids, there's still so many opportunities to help out. For example, I have family with a cabin near Red Mountain at Rocky River. If we based a program out of there, there could be volunteers going over there and helping maintain the structures or clearing the trail in, which would be awesome because it's just another great excuse to spend time over there. Living in Homer, I think it's easy to forget that in most of the world, wild places have been developed on and dominated. We have an amazing opportunity and resource that few others have to demonstrate to people, particularly young girls, the meaningfulness of wild places and intact ecosystems. I think we can all relate to the majesty of going across the bay or to the head of the bay or somewhere else nearby and being in these places and just the profound impact they have. Next slide. Studies demonstrate that exposing young people to nature and outdoor experiential education reduces stress, increases confidence, and promotes resiliency. Experiential outdoor education involves giving the girls direct experiences in nature to reflect on, which develops awareness of their relationship with the natural world. Similar programs have been studied and demonstrate not only short-term increases in environmental knowledge, pro-environmental attitudes, and intentions to act in environmentally responsible ways, but also long-term retention of those concepts and intentions. By encouraging prefrontal cortex activation and cognitive growth, positive mental health habits, and by sharing knowledge about the environmental system, the kids we work with will grow to be more likely to participate in pro-environmental behavior. They'll also learn valuable skills in living sustainably. Next slide. In essence, outdoor programs for girls will facilitate an expanding community of folks committed to caring for and protecting our planet and each other. Drawdown demonstrates that these programs have the potential to draw down large amounts of carbon. I also love this solution because it's sharing the lessons that we are drawing from these meetings. The kids can learn that they are capable of making a tangible difference in creating a more positive, protected ecosystem, just as we are. The programs also, so importantly, promote resiliency in vulnerable populations and prepares our youth for the future. I am super excited to work with all of you on whatever project we choose. I know no matter what, we are dedicated to being inclusive of minorities and to protecting and supporting women and girls. Thank y'all so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Carly. And right as the timer went off. Now I think it's my turn. So Satchel, if you'll release the screen.
And I'll take over timer here.
Okay, sounds good. I'll start one just to remind myself. So my presentation, the solution is mini mass public transit in the Homer area. The Drawdown book solution is number 37. And my rubric score for this was a 43 out of 60. So obviously in a pandemic, public transportation may not be what people want to engage in as a project, but I present this on its merits and we can evaluate that kind of separately. Hopefully it won't last forever. So what are the benefits of public transportation? Public transportation can reduce the risks of road accidents. It helps older residents and residents with disabilities have more mobility. It has a direct effect on reducing greenhouse gases, and it's measurable easily by ridership. It's a lower cost option compared to car ownership, which helps low-income families. It's a good option for youth needing a ride to school or college or work if they don't have a car. And it is fun. But the main challenge with public transportation is securing long-term funding. So what's already here on the peninsula? We have the CARTS program, Central Area Rural Transit System, but that's up in the Central Kenai Peninsula. They're a door-to-door type of transit that must be scheduled in advance. This is one type of structure to consider called demand route and only operates when demand calls for it. The rides are cheaper than using a taxi because of the funding they receive. But and at one time they did have some borough funding. They have some vans and they also subcontract with taxis as needed. Another program that's in place on the peninsula is the BUMPS program. Here's the schedule. It goes from Ninilchik to Homer, back through Ninilchik up to Soldotna and Kenai. It goes to Fred Meyer or Walmart at the airport and then back. Timing's not bad for commuters to get from Anchor Point to Homer. Actually, if you look at it, they could have a 9:30 to 4 work shift and then get back to Anchor Point. I'm not sure if anyone uses it this way. My understanding is they receive federal funding and also have access to other funds as a native tribe. It's $10 for a round trip. I didn't even know this existed until I started researching this. So that was kind of cool to figure out. Their vans are ADA accessible also. I tried to contact them for a few more details, but I was unsuccessful. I did speak to Joanna Geisler from the Independent Living Center. They use vouchers with the cab companies to help with mobility for people with a disability, and that's all they can do. And that comes from federal DOT funds. It's effective for its purpose, but it's really not a public transportation per se. It's limited in scope. Specifically here in Homer, the concept could be applied in several ways. Most likely we would use a passenger van or a small bus. Some ideas would be an East Road bus system, an intercity transit moving people to the Spit and around town, or maybe an anchor point bus. Options would be a fixed route, which is simple, runs a regular schedule, but you have to get to a bus stop. A deviated route, which it kind of follows a fixed route, but you can leave that route within a certain distance and go pick people up and then continue on. Those deviations do cause less predictability with the schedule. And then there's a door-to-door, kind of like the carts. Okay, keep moving here. Next, hopefully. Don't know why it's clicking through those again. That's why I shouldn't have done it. Okay, funding. How do we fund this type of stuff? A lot of the funding comes from federal Department of Transportation funds, either 5311 or 5310. The 5311 is more broadly used for rural projects. 5310 is associated with ADA or senior type projects. So that is where there's a lot of great examples of rural transit across the country, and most of their funding comes from this. And it does look like there is money available, especially to fund the infrastructure. City of Homer or the borough may need to kick in some kind of project that we would take on. So what will it take to do this? First, we're going to have to do a lot of research. We're going to have to find out rider interest, pick a route. We're going to have to decide what kind, whether it's a fixed route, a deviated route, or some combination of all those. We'll have to identify funding sources, all of them. Pick a vehicle type. Are we going to use a small bus, some kind of passenger van, or some kind of other thing that we've come up with? There's my timer.
I was just about to tell you.
All right. And we'd have to plan a budget, and that's going to have to be dependent upon what kind of funding sources we can have. So then we have to move to implementation, and we want to do something, substantial within a year. We'd have to find a vehicle, pick what kind of vehicle we want, and find one. Advertise, get the word out. Like I said, with that bumps program, I hadn't even heard of it. So we have to do a good job of that. We have to hire some staff, find some volunteer opportunities, and implement some pandemic protocols. So it's a big job, and there's a lot of room for a lot of people to be involved, and I'm out. Thanks.
Awesome. That's exciting. Next up, we will have Kim.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you.
It'll start coming out.
Project solution is peatlands. So peat is neither ground nor water, but something in between. It is the buildup of plant matter in wetlands. For peat to form, there has to be both plants and water. Globally, peatland stores twice the carbon that is held by all the world's forests, so long as they stay wet. So due to their significant load of carbon, peatland has been ranked as the number 13 drawdown solution. Next slide, please. Much of our peat is already protected in the wildlife refuge, Kenai Wildlife Refuge, though many local areas are not, including patches in the Beluga Wetlands, Stone Step area, Bridge Creek, and larger tracts in the Anchor and Stursky drainages. Next slide. So peat works like a landscape scale sponge to retain huge volumes of cold water that recharge our streams during dry periods. You can think of peatlands as our actual water reservoir. They are critical to our non-glacial aquifers for local water use and salmon rearing. Next slide. So we know that there's a lot of acreage of peat, but what we don't necessarily know is how deep it is. In order for us to understand the carbon value of our peatlands, we need to know the volume of peat, and we need to measure the carbon budget and the rates of sequestration. These steps are currently underway, and they're necessary to get our local peatlands on the global carbon market, where landowners could sell their otherwise pretty undesirable lands. However, just because an acre of peatland is set aside in perpetuity does not necessarily ensure that it will continue to sequester its carbon load. Next slide, please. Threats to our local peatlands are an example of the positive feedback loop. As dry conditions persist, water levels drop and vegetative succession occurs, resulting in fewer small lakes and wetland areas. Whereas peatlands have sequestered carbon in the past, it is likely that they are losing their sequestration power and could even unleash their load of stored carbon back into the atmosphere. As more brush and spruce moves in, the rates of photosynthesis and the water budget change. Despite increases in precipitation, our peatlands are still drying. Forest lands may have more productivity, but along with that comes higher rates of evapotranspiration. If conditions become warmer and drier, this will likely lead to a substantial loss of carbon from the system, but this is a question that needs to be answered before peatlands can be placed on the carbon market. Next slide. Oh, next slide, please. So what could a potential drawdown project look like? Considering that time is of the essence, I could envision the creation of a citizen organization that supports, accelerates, and expands the ongoing or existing strategies. And many of these efforts, I believe, could be pretty COVID safe. Next slide. So local businesses, individuals, traveling tourists, and building owners could offset their carbon footprints by contributing to a peatland preservation in a grassroots, non-accredited program that could start immediately. And I think this could be applied probably to most of the other projects as well. But I think that by organizing our fundraising to mimic a carbon offset program, we could help educate our community about the money-making potential of getting peatlands or getting into the global carbon market in other ways. Next slide. We could put forth a volunteer effort to collect data on things like peat depth and aquifer monitoring. There are also upcoming interns and grad students that will be working on these projects, and hopefully we would be able to help them in their studies and efforts. Next slide. And peatlands are widely misunderstood and underappreciated. We could interface with private landowners to help them make wise decisions with their own lands. We can also create educational programs and field trips that connect people to local peatlands. Next slide, please. Considering the high number of interest groups, networking efforts could lead to collaborative and synergistic strategies. Especially, we could help the current efforts by the Ketchimek Bay Research Reserve to get our local peatlands on the global carbon market. Next slide. And another thing we might be able to do is influence and direct ecosystem change to better protect peatlands. So with precipitation happening in more punctuated events, water may simply be running off rather than recharging our peatlands. Can we use beavers or mimic their activity for greater water retention on the landscape, such as using these beaver tubes to divert high water runoff back into the peatland sponge? Next slide. So disruptions to peat, such as the removal of gravel mining, can release stored carbon. Overburden for road construction can sever aquifer. So this is really unregulated currently. Next slide. So the co-benefits of peatland is enormous, and many of those are directly related to the threats of climate change. So I believe if you look at this project as like ton per carbon per unit of community effort, this could be one of our biggest bangs for our buck. So thank you very much for your time.
Brilliant. Love it. Thank you so much, Kim. And then next we're going to hear from Zoe on a reuse and reuse facility or keeping the salvage site open. And your 5 minutes begins when your slides are up.
Okay, revive and expand salvage site or create independent reuse facility. Next slide. So I got in contact with the solid waste director office, and the secretary told me that the Homer transfer site construction demolition area is closing indefinitely and there's no room for a new one. And there have been volunteers in the past to educate about like recycling and other things like that, but not so much for anything as like people staying there in the salvage tent to facilitate anything like that. However, people could pick up tent materials at the end of the day. Next slide. So I got in contact with Amy Anderson from Build Up, which is an independent nonprofit reuse facility for construction materials in Soldotna. And she is very willing to help Homer create our own Build Up branch. And she began working on hers in August of 2019 and gained a storefront in August of 2020. She receives her largest donations from local hardware stores and contractors to sell it then to customers for cheap prices. It took a lot of people hours, and for her storefront, she's wanting to hire people because there has been volunteer burnout, and currently she has 4 volunteers working 3 days a week. And she would be open to having some kind of a fundraising event to help Homer fundraise to start renting our own storefront, similar to what we had an electronic recycling day, where we have one day where people bring all their construction stuff and then we drive it up to Soldotna, they sell it there, and then some of the profits go to Homer. Next slide. So let's see. With the dedication of a group of volunteers, the solution has been shown to be feasible within 1 year. However, it would be an around-the-clock commitment. It would take a lot of volunteer hours, and there could be a potential for volunteer burnout. And it's very possible, but most importantly, it's politically feasible because everybody hates wasting perfectly good materials. It would start a community conversation about local solutions to waste management, even among those not concerned with climate change. However, the message of waste management might not cross over in many people's minds to be related with climate change or global warming. Next slide. This solution is self-sustaining if we work really hard to make it self-sustaining. It would take a lot of money to rent a place and to get it started, and we'd eventually need to hire people to run the storefront. These things cost time and money, and in order to be long-lasting, there would also need to be a lot of public awareness that this store existed. And the bigger stores like Spenard's and other private contractors would need to get on board with giving us donations. And we'd also need safety trainings for volunteers, and it would be immune to political shifts. People will be able to volunteer, and this would engage people. And if we were able to make a communication campaign, this would also engage our volunteers with creativity as well as the public. Next slide. Depending on how this project is communicated, there could be a lot of awareness around it, and it could be in the vicinity of climate action if directed purposefully. And it would be visible because if we have a reuse store itself, people could go there and buy things. That's visibility. There is no solution in Drawdown that matches this. Household recycling is number 55 on Drawdown's list. It would expand the lifespan of our landfill, thus making those emissions less, but it's not really measurable. Next slide. There would be a lot of volunteer positions available for people if we had a storefront. We'd need training and organizing and people reaching out to larger stores, asking for donations. We could have educational days that drew more people and volunteers in. And this project would also promote justice and equality because it would allow people to buy construction materials for cheaper. And, you know, if we were successful enough, we could even give them away to free to those who qualified for those free materials. Next slide. Extra benefits or problems. If successful, these extra profits could go towards other community groups and projects, and problems would be COVID-19 would limit volunteers and create storefront difficulties. Next slide. Overall, this is needed and wanted in our community, and we would have a lot of support from Build Up in Soldotna. It would take a lot of work, and we'd need a lot of dedicated volunteers. It would be a visible progress that we could see, but there wouldn't be a measurable reduction in carbon. That's my presentation on salvage site reuse stuff.
Wow, almost exactly 5 minutes. Good job. Thank you, Zoe. That's exciting. Next is Katie Rice talking about community compost.
Great. And so I'm going to be talking about a possible community composting project. Next slide, please, Satchel. So there's a lot of great benefits and opportunities from community composting. One is that keeping food waste and yard waste out of the landfill reduces methane emissions, which has about 30 times the warming effect of carbon dioxide. Composting also extends the life of the landfill by keeping organic materials out of it. Another great benefit is that compost is a needed soil amendment for local sustainable agriculture. Currently, there's multiple farms in Homer that are hauling in compost from the valley. Compost also has the potential to educate and engage a wide range of people in our community. We all eat, we all produce waste, and many of us garden, no matter what our age or politics or culture is. And on the most recent Drawdown review list of solutions, compost ranked 57 or 62, depending on the scenario. Next screen, please. So here's a quick overview of a few common types of composting to give you some context for the next few slides. Keep in mind that the scale, effort, the required equipment, and the ability to compost different sources of organic material like food waste, yard waste, compostable containers, meat waste, fish waste, and so on. Those all vary depending on your composting method. But all of these methods sequester carbon, they keep organic waste out of the landfill, and they all produce a valuable soil amendment. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering what other Alaskan communities are doing. We have some amazing people and organizations working on composting in this state, despite the difficulties that come with the territory here. In Anchorage, the city's solid waste service partners with a private company to compost food and yard waste in windrows. The city pays for this with landfill user fees. And just for context, for a large city like Anchorage, it costs them about $30,000 to $50,000 a year to do that. In Southeast, there's two small businesses that have different models. In Haines, they offer free drop-off for food waste, and then the company sells the resulting compost. In Juneau, there's a company that offers a paid subscription service for pickup or drop-off of food and yard waste, and then they sell the compost. In Soldotna, the Drawdown group there decided on compost as their project, and they partnered with a local peony farm. Participants drop off food waste that's composted in windrows during the summer. Then the food waste is used as chicken feed during the winter, and eventually the chicken manure will get composted too. I also wanted to mention Susitna Organics in Wasilla because that's where a lot of farmers in Homer get their compost. They primarily compost horse manure, so it's a different model than food waste, but it's another successful business model to look at. Next slide, please. So what about the history of composting in Homer? So there's a lot of groundwork already laid here, but also some challenges that have come up. In 2013, the Borough commissioned a feasibility study that recommended a pilot project in Homer using containerized aerated static pile composting, which is a pretty large scale, $1.25 million kind of project. In 2016, which obviously didn't happen. In 2016, the borough's solid waste department tried to pilot a project at the transfer site in Homer, but that ran into some problems and didn't move forward. Then in 2017, the Kachemak Advocates of Recycling partnered with the borough to start a project in Kachemak City using food waste from local businesses, but that ran into some logistical hurdles as well. And more recently, Matt James from Alaska Smart Soil has started composting horse manure, and last year he produced 25 cubic yards of compost, and he's hoping to be able to scale up to be able to supply compost to local farms. He isn't currently incorporating food waste, but if this project were to move forward, he's super knowledgeable and about composting here in Homer, and he would be a great resource. Next slide, please. So obviously there's a lot of potential for composting here in Homer, but there's some significant challenges too. Some of the barriers depend on the method and the scale of the composting project. But the biggest challenges that are common to each method are land, labor, and winter. You need land to compost, and land in Homer is expensive. You also need a lot of manual labor, and it keeps going. You need humans to manage the delivery of their organic materials, to mix the compost, to turn it, to sift it. Even if you used a mechanized system like heavy equipment, machines are expensive, they need maintenance, and they need someone running them. So this project would need a fairly large pool of reliable volunteers over a long period of time. Finally, we have to consider winter in Alaska. There's ways of keeping compost working all winter, but it can be challenging, and food waste doesn't just stop accumulating when you get a frost. So these are all areas that we would want to consider before moving forward with the composting program here. That's my quick and dirty intro to composting at Homer.
Thank you, Katie. There's so many of these solutions that could tie into that one. Yeah, very exciting. So our last presentation before we'll take a break is from our champion, Scott, and he's going to be talking about collective buying power, similar to Solarize for heat pumps.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Scott Waterman, and we are talking about a buying pool. Next slide, please. So we're looking at heat pumps. Heat pump is basically, usually it can be as simple as just a compressor and a heat delivery unit head inside. Next slide, please. It works similar to a refrigerator, and it is it's something that can just move heat from one place to another. So we can have something outside and then move the heat to the inside. And it will take heat out of the air down to about 5 degrees Fahrenheit relatively efficiently. Next slide, please. The solution is very feasible to implement and doable within 1 year. It's similar to Solarize, which has already been done in Kenai Soldotna and here in Homer this year. Those projects are still going on, but they were quite successful. There was a good bit of education and participation. Basically, the program just does a request for proposals from contractors. Those contractors are screened and selected. There's interest solicited among consumers, and the awarded contractor then contacts consumers and goes to work. The possibilities of this, next slide, please, are really quite doable, and we can make it. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble moving along like this. I'm gonna have to look a little bit closer. There is a possibility of collaboration with the Cold Climate Housing Research Center and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. There is a project like this going on in Seward. In Juneau. It's called the Incentivizing Cold Climate Efficiency. And so that project is going on already, and there's a possibility of collaboration and maybe perhaps some assistance with those. Next slide, please. The solution would be able to start conversations. It's it's got the ability to educate people about long-range gas supplies, what might happen to electric prices in the future, and a whole variety of other educational opportunities. Next slide, please. It is sustainable, self-sufficient, and not subject to any kind of political whims because it's a totally free market solution. It would be mostly utilized by those without access to natural gas for economic reasons. It wouldn't involve any government or political action at all. Next slide, please. And the solution would engage people who are involved in implementing. Next slide, please. The project is measurable, and there's a whole variety of different metrics that one could choose to include, and we would be able to show a variety of different metrics that would be absolutely measurable. Next slide, please. I ran some numbers on my house. Next slide, please. It looks like if I was to switch from propane to a heat pump here on my house, I would save almost 9 tons of carbon dioxide over the lifetime of the equipment. If we could get 100 people to participate, that's like 90 tons. And it would be completely economical and self-sustaining. There is a heat pump calculator at the website that's shown there, heatpump.cf/. That calculator is set up to do economic analysis for Alaskans. Next slide, please. It would have a number of roles for people to participate in. There are a lot of different opportunities for education, for outreach, and of course to participate in. Next slide, please. And unfortunately, it doesn't work to promote much in the way of social justice or address inequities. Next slide. And final slide. With 7 of the 8 metrics met, we would be able to do this project within a year. And while not meeting the last metric that was set up by this group, it does draw down carbon. And I feel it meets the metrics of what this group is trying to do and is not hugely intensive. I think for a couple hundred hours work, we could get a project going. And this may be something to consider even if another is selected. It's a relatively easy one to do, so it could be a secondary. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Scott. And I like that you threw that little hint in there, because I think as many people know, in Soldotna, when they chose composting, they also decided to throw in Solarize too. So food for thought. Satchel, do you want to lead us into our next section?
So the next thing we're gonna do is just go into breakout rooms to have an opportunity to kind of like respond to everything you just heard. And we wanna send you into breakout rooms because it provides more of an opportunity for you to share your thoughts. If we were to just stay in this big group, way less people would be able to actually talk because we don't have that much time. So we're gonna send you into like pretty large breakout rooms, maybe like 8, or no, maybe like 7 to 8 people in a room. And I think that that's basically your prompt, is to just like share what you're excited about, share what you have concerns about, and then when we come back, we'll have an opportunity to ask direct questions to the solution champions. We'd also like to, we don't have an official break in this meeting, so we'd like to give you this opportunity to take a break if you are just like, I'm like feeling like you need a moment. But so we are gonna come back at 7:12. Welcome back. It was lonely here without you. I hope that was enough time. I know that it probably was not, and I wish that we could have really robust discussions, but we have a lot of great ideas, so we have to, really figure out where our time is best spent. So I hope you made the most of that. And now we want to open it up for really like direct questions to our champions. Dale's going to moderate, and this isn't like an open discussion, it's a question answer forum, so keep your questions sort of concise and to the point, and we'll have about 15 minutes.
Yeah, and I'll call on you, and then also if you have a question you can put it in the chat, and Satchel's going to try to pull some of those out as well. But yeah, try to formulate a question in your head and be brief, and we'll get to the answers. So who's got a hand up? Anyone? Must have questions for one of these 10 presenters.
Well, I'm just going to read what Aaron said. because I'm the wind proponent, and someone asked about the potential contribution of wind energy, and Aaron has the numbers. So 10 megawatt wind farm, which is about half of what they have in Fairbanks, would be about 7% of our energy, whereas 25%, which is about 11 turbines, totally possible around here, and with what I was proposing would be about 18%.
Awesome.
Nicole,
Nicole?
can I ask you a question that came
Oh.
up in our working group? And that was that is the Drawdown project part of that a research and information acquisition project, and then how would that like move forward to the big moving and shaking of getting the wind going?
Well, so there's no guarantees on it, just say that, but I think, yeah, there's gonna have to be collaborative effort on the research and figuring out where exactly to position the monitors, getting the relationships with the land, and then having that year's worth of data. After that, I mean, I can't say what that data will tell us. We may decide, okay, we need to set up these monitors elsewhere because this isn't looking good, or we find it's looking good. But then the next stage would be a permitting process, and I think at that point it really would be kind of like a handoff to the utility. Doesn't mean we would fully hand it off, but more or less we would. But the upside of that whole interaction is I think it establishes, as I was saying to our little breakout group, but I think it establishes the kind of relationship that we as a group, as a Drawdown group, ultimately need to have with our utility cooperative, which is that we are directly engaged with what they're doing. We're really asking them questions, pushing them to figure out what are the renewable solutions, and we're participating in that so that we can ultimately, not just build one wind farm, but several, and et cetera. Does that answer the question?
Well, we have a question from Nicole. Go ahead, Nicole. Then we'll go to Adele.
Yeah, in our breakout room, it was something that was begun in the chat box, but we're, talking about how if we could just smash together the food waste and the construction waste items and vote on them both together as one. And I don't know if that works with this, you've got 10 solutions, we have to pick one. But I'm vying for smashing those two together and considering it one option. There's been a lot of chatter in the chat box for that. And pretty much, I think everybody in our group agreed that those two together kind of make for an awesome solution.
I'm not going to respond at the moment, but that's something to consider potentially. Let's go to Adele's question, and then Satchel, I think there was a couple in the chat, if you could read those out for us.
Sure. I'm just curious about like the scale of food waste here. I mean, I understand it's one of the big Drawdown solutions or issues, but I kind of conceive of that more as like factory farms and, large scale California farms. I don't know how much food waste we actually produce here that would be meaningful to change.
Well, from what I can tell, it is kind of significant. But it's like a local scale significant, but that's like kind of where we're at as this group. So there are a lot of farms that end up in, as far as I can tell, at the end of the season with, excess. There is, in talking with people at McNeil Meats, they feel personally pretty repulsed by the amount of waste that they take during, especially moose season, just to the dump. And then fish waste and plus other freezer waste from individuals getting ready for the next season. These are things that, we could inroad with pretty easy, and, it would take a year, to have a number for you or all of us. But I do feel like that it is a contributing factor to what goes into the landfill and what could otherwise be consumed.
Your question was related to composting or food storage?
I guess a bit the food storage more, but a little bit the composting as well.
Well, the pilot projects were going to pick up from all the restaurants, and they estimated that there would be quite a significant supply just from the restaurants, not even counting any household waste for those pilot projects that Katie mentioned. Go ahead, Satchel.
There's been a lot of questions in the chat, and some of them are getting answered by the champions. I will respond as far as the combination of the compost and the food preservation solution. Our champion, Katie, suggests that the compost solution is a really big project on its own and might need all of our efforts if we were to choose that one. Although I do think that food waste would be a big part of the compost program. So
Actually, it wasn't compost, it was the construction waste and the food waste.
Oh,
just to clarify.
Okay, thank you. There are also just different suggestions in the chat. I will just go for a question in the chat. Karen asked Kim how long it takes to get a certification for the peat project carbon market.
So Kui Walker, who's with the Ketchback Bay Research Reserve, is currently spearheading a project here on the blue carbon market with the Smithsonian Boards of Directors. She's saying a 3 to 5 year project to try to get that going. There are some more information we need to be able to quantify the amount of carbon that's stored in our peatlands here, including the depth of peat and the changes in sequestration and evaporation and transpiration. So that whole carbon budget that requires a lot of monitoring is currently being undertaken by UAA. They're actually just now setting up the equipment to monitor that. I could also say that there are a lot of landowners that are eager to sell acreage to the carbon market, including Cook Inlet Regional Incorporated, the borough, and the state. So there's a high demand and people want to get money for their land that they're not otherwise getting money for. I hope that answers your question succinctly.
I see Rika just dancing at that music.
There's another question for Penny. Are there any areas on this side of the bay that match wind generation with the other side? I think.
So the short answer is no. Doesn't mean you couldn't put something up on this side, but I just don't think it's going to get it's not going to be as efficient. Like the bang for your buck, if you are going to go through all of the work and money to set up these turbines, I don't see that it makes sense. But the first step for a project would be to kind of really run through that whole question. I don't feel like my project, I'm not the one to answer it. I don't have the final word on that, but from what I researched, no, the other side is where we want it. The other contributing factor is the transmission lines. So we want to be on the transmission lines near the Bradley Lake project because they are the ones that can handle that load.
Anyone else have a question that they maybe put in the chat that got buried? Just raise your hand now and you can ask that. Otherwise, go ahead, Satchel.
A question just about sort of the technicalities around heat pumps. What's the electrical cost to run a heat pump? For example, a 1,500 square foot 5-star energy rated home for a month where the average temperature is at 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay. I don't know the answer with those parameters. I did look. It would, for my house, I ran it through the calculator and it would add about 2,000 kilowatt hours a year to me, a little bit less, actually 1,950 or so. It would add about that many extra kilowatt hours for heat for the whole year. The offset would be, and my house is a little bit weird because I have a little bit of propane heat, but not very much. But if I was heating the whole house with propane, I would save several hundred gallons of propane each year. And the cost of that would more than offset the additional cost of electricity.
I have a question for Scott. I think I might have saw it, sorry, and then I'll get to whoever started talking next. Scott, briefly, the refrigerant, can you address the refrigerant issue related to heat pumps? Because that was a big, one of the top solutions in the Drawdown book to address refrigerant waste properly.
There is a lot of effort being made to make the refrigerants less environmentally harmful. There are also most refrigerator technicians are now trained to recover any refrigerant from any system that they work on. And it is required in most, I think in every state, to have refrigerant recovery programs in place. So even if you were just going to take a refrigerator to the landfill, there is a process where the refrigerant has to be removed before that refrigerator can actually be dumped.
Okay, thank you. And who else next that had a question?
I was just going to ask if Scott could post that link to the calculator in the chat box.
Okay, yeah, sure I can. No worries.
Anyone else, or anyone want to share briefly some idea or something that came out of their chat, their breakout group also? We have a few minutes left and then we'll move on to the voting.
So I guess I just noticed there's a kind of maybe a contingency of people who think that it's going to be a good idea to do more than one project. And maybe some folks who don't. It seems like we should establish what we are voting for. Like, are we voting for one thing? Can we vote for multiple things? How on that?
Satchel, you want to address that, or I can also clarify?
Yeah, so we've had long discussions in our steering committee about this, and ultimately we want to achieve a solution. So I think it serves us best to direct our energy into the same project. However, there are a lot of us. I'm really excited that there's 50 people here today. That's really incredible. And there's absolutely nothing stopping anybody from taking leadership and yeah, like working on another solution. However, as steering committee members and as sort of organizational sponsors of Drawdown, we will be facilitating one solution. And if there are other solutions that are simultaneously getting worked on and they'd like to collaborate but take sort of all the leadership responsibilities of what a solution needs on, we can definitely create space and continue to like act like we're both Drawdown. We are all Drawdown people. And we can talk about both in our meetings, but yes, like our steering committee is committing to facilitating one solution for capacity reasons.
Yeah, that's a good summary. We did talk about it at length, and I think that especially in this environment right now, getting one solution done will be great progress. And next year, there's still all these solutions are still going to be sitting there, and I think some of them can, as you guys probably talked about in your breakout groups, some kind of pigtail on the other ones. We talked about how like heat pumps ties into getting funding for low-income families, and then getting girls outside, women and girls educating ties into several of them. So yes, what Satchel said, the steering committee has discussed it. We're all of the same mind that we should try to do one. I know that's hard to do.
Yeah.
Any other questions for any of the panelists or any other brief comments? We got maybe a couple minutes left, and then that's about it.
This is Sue. Just with the cost, the Penelope said initially at 90 million. I love that you didn't seem to blink an eye at it, and that that AEA would help us, but to me it seems a little unsurmountable. But you have some other vision that maybe could help me, wrap my arms around it or something.
Yeah, sorry, Sue. I think I might have been misleading. So the whole project long term would cost in the ballpark 90 million. But the reason I brought that up is because the initial phase that we're talking about here, which is just the wind prospecting and the outreach and the and so on, that it would need to follow some pretty strict parameters that go together with funding such a project that has a large cost. So like banks are involved. Like we can't just go out there and do whatever. We need to be following some parameters and working with who ultimately would be funding this. upfront. The initial cost of the equipment to do the wind monitoring does vary. So if we were to buy a SODAR outright, it's going to cost $180,000. But the reason I brought an AEA is because I am fairly certain that we do not have to buy that thing outright, that they will loan it to us or rent it to us. I did not speak with them directly, but I got some pretty clear confirmations from some different folks that we can do that. Does that answer your question? Ultimately,
Thank you.
ultimately that number of that 90 million, like HEA is probably going to have to be the ones to take on figuring out the funding for that.
I have a
All right, Jean.
Yeah. Even though I've been to a lot of the meetings and this information that was laid out today was awesome and very extensive, and I find it really hard to say I'm going to vote tonight. Is there any way we can, like, I could watch this recording a couple more times, and then it's just like there's too much here, and it was all great. So that's my problem that I'm having right now, saying I'm going to vote for one thing.
I understand the sentiment. I totally do. I think as a steering committee, we're committed to trying to keep this moving. And any other steering committee is welcome to pipe up.
I definitely am as conflicted as Eugene. I feel, Jeannie, I feel also conflicted of which one I'm going to choose, because there are so many great options and I'm excited about so many. But like Dale said, we need that momentum to keep us going. And I think whatever we choose, I feel a lot of us can get behind it and really excited about it. So even if it's not some of our first choices, I think that we can all still be excited about it.
All of our solutions are really exciting. All of our solutions are achievable. All of our solutions are going to make a difference and make an impact in Homer. And we can work on the next one after we finish this one. Or as what happened in Soldotna, there'll be natural momentum that builds up for another solution, and it just happens. The Solarize campaign in Soldotna was entirely volunteer led. Like that, I, as Cook and Lake Keeper staff, run Solarize up down here. In Soldotna, Ben, who I think is in this meeting, ran it pretty much entirely himself with a steering committee of volunteers. So it's not impossible for us to do, for, you know, any one of us can empower ourselves and each other to achieve these solutions. But that being said, I do think we are ready to take some time to look at the list and make a decision. I'm not gonna like say you have 60 seconds to vote, but we are gonna send out the Google form for you to look at, and once we get responses back, we will look at those responses together and go and vote a second time, so that if your original vote was not one that many people selected, you still have an opportunity to vote on one of those top 2 or 3, depending on how it's split up, most popular solutions. So I'm gonna just copy this link. It's a Google form, and put it in the chat right now. I have tested it, it should work, but please inform me right away if it does not. I don't trust anything anymore when it comes to technology and Zoom meetings and Google Forms. So. There's been a lot of really great discussion happening in the chat. I'd recommend just taking a look at that. Gary, you're sharing your screen. Is that intentional? Okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. We've got about 30 responses in so far. We have 45 people in the meeting. Probably when we hit about 40, that'll be more accurate for the people who are truly with us right now. This is more exciting than election night. You're gonna find out right away.
Almost right away. We will have a second vote between the top 2 or maybe 3.
That's true. Thanks, Dale.
You're welcome.
Who's the steering committee of the Drawdown?
I don't know.
It is myself, Dale, Bjorn, and Zoe.
Nice work, everybody.
And we are so excited to be transitioning into this next phase and it being a more distributed steering committee / roles / everyone stepping into their own responsibilities and roles and projects and leadership. Okay, we're at 37. I haven't looked yet, guys. I don't know. Um, 38. If you're like, I don't know what to vote, like, and you're still voting, but you're with us, maybe like raise your hand or say in the chat, give me like 30 more seconds or something. Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, we're at 30, we're at 40. Oh, we're still trickling in. Looks like we're splitting really evenly between 3. Oh, it just changed. Oh my gosh, you guys. It's still really close between 3. Think I'm ready to call, here, I'll share my screen. So, okay, here we go. Number 1 right now is peatland preservation and awareness, which is exciting. Peatlands make a big difference. We've also got our food preservation and co-op coming in high, and we've got our compost. So I think, should we have it between the 3 or just the top 2?
I mean, there's no problem having it be 3 and then we vote one more time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Whoops. Peatland. Oh, whoops. There's a lot of pressure right now. Compost and, oh, I can't. Don't vote for other. What's our last one? Food preservation. Okay. and multiple choice. Okay, sending you a narrowed down final voting form right now. I just don't even know. Is everyone on the edge of their seats? We're at 28 responses. $35. Yes, I feel a lot of like silence and awkward pressure building. So if anyone wants to share anything, they are welcome to right now.
Unlike some other elections, no matter what happens, it's gonna be awesome.
True.
And I think we'll all respect the results.
Totally.
Well, and it's not like there's just, we don't have to do an either or. I mean, it's not like the cycling club's not going to keep working on bicycling in town, or I'm not going to work on trail advocacy, or someone's not going to work on compost. Like, these are all ideas that are generating from our culture. And it's just somebody gets a push now and someone else get a push later.
I see a huge value in having had taken the time to network together about solutions and actions. And for things like the food waste and compost, how collaborative they are, I feel like no matter what project gets picked, there will, as much as our capacity is able, like we will piggyback the other ideas on top of that, I am sure. Like incorporating women and girls into whatever project, like making it a point to incorporate women and girls prominently in whatever project we do. So
yeah, Kim, that's super brilliant. Like your idea of using whatever project we choose as a non-accredited offset for people to fundraise as a mechanism for fundraising and to support carbon reduction. And then I had the same thought of integrating girls no matter what. A lot of these things can be woven together into a big tapestry.
Okay, we're at 41. And I haven't looked at the results because I'm being very patient. And I'm just going to share my screen now and go over to the results. So if anyone has not voted, please do so right now. Okay. Peatland, clear winner. Food preservation, compost. Wow, this is exciting. I truly think that peatland preservation is the solution that will have the most direct carbon, preservation, I don't know. We will avoid the most carbon in our atmosphere. So this is really exciting. Release the beavers. Yes, Bjorn. In Kim's initial presentation that she gave just to our champions, there was a lot more discussion about beavers and parachutes, and we'll have to talk about that at a future meeting.
Yeah, I just want to take a minute to like thank everybody for being open-minded about something that may be a little bit more obscure. And I think that while some of these other projects had a lot more public visibility and community output, like if this is the one that we've picked, it would be awesome to brainstorm ways to like help make this project visible in the public and incorporate as many people and community members as possible. So
I think it's very doable.
Yeah. I hand it over to Bjorn. I don't know if, or if we want to have like a few minutes more of reaction open discussion time.
We are going to call it For Pete's Sake, right? That's the campaign.
Absolutely,
For Pete's sake.
right? Yes. And the beaver is our mascot.
It's really huge. I mean, letting that carbon go into the atmosphere, you know, I don't know how you like make peat but letting what we have here on this peninsula up there, you know, it would be devastating for the world.
You make peat by keeping it wet. That's how you keep making peat. And I think about like local agriculture too, like and anybody who has a shallow well, our drinking water, like we had that drinking water scare. I mean, there are and the connectivity of wildfire routes, like with increased spruce. I mean, there are so many things that regarding this that are directly related to the threats of climate change.
Cool.
I just want to add that Seal wrote that the reduction in peatlands restoration is needed. So it's not just about preserving what hasn't already been preserved. It's about maintaining that functioning ecosystem as it naturally is going to want to transition in the face of climate change. Hence the beaver. We can all be hardworking beavers.
You know, it's a community successful idea when Rika is just beaming.
Absolutely.
Well, if there's anybody that doesn't know how sexy peatlands are, the more you learn, the more you'll be like Rika. So it's one of those things that we will just acculturate this knowledge, and that's what climate change is. It's acculturating different values and different systems in our human world. So kudos, guys. Well done.
Really, so well done. Thank you, everyone.
I've spent a lot of time in holes in peat, and I love peat, so that's very exciting.
Yes. So many allies. And so I think, you know, as we move into, you know, kind of, you know, bringing this meeting to a close, I think that it's, I'm going to be cheesy actually for a minute and ask us all to like kind of close our eyes. Like, you know, we've been working on this since January. And now we have gone through the 7 chapters. We've worked through all these different solutions. We've talked to countless experts, and we have all collectively come together to come up with one, you know, meaningful carbon reduction solution that is going to be implemented now by our collective power and will. And so, you know, just close your eyes for a minute and kind of, you know, let that sink in, and then think about, you know, like, where are you going? How and where in this do you see yourself and your strengths and your weaknesses fitting in, and, you know, building this to its, you know, within 1 year, and then hopefully as it continues to evolve, you know, like really kind of think about that. And you don't have to, you know, answer this now, but, you know, meditate on this, you know, pretty neat thing that we've accomplished up to now, and then what we're going to accomplish now into the future. And then know that we had initially talked about having our next meeting be on the second Thursday of the month, but this synergistic thing that is also happening right now on the Kenai Peninsula is that is actually the inaugural meeting of the Resilience and Security Commission meeting, and we hope that all of you attend. Many of you here were, you know, very instrumental in getting that approved and up and running. And there's a tremendous amount of overlap between Homer Drawdown and the work that they're going to be doing. And hopefully we can all stay involved with them as they define their parameters and what they're going to achieve. So with that in mind, we were like, whoa, we can't be on the same night. So we're going to meet, wait, did we decide the Wednesday before, right? Yes, the Wednesday before. Oh no, I'm sorry, the third Thursday. We did change it to the third Thursday, which is the 19th. So our next Homer Drawdown meeting, where we will start kind of digging into, you know, what the nuts and bolts of this will look like for Pete's sake, will be on the 19th at 6 p.m. and we'll be sure that everybody, you know, gets an email reminder, and we will do the same things we always do, get it on Facebook and such. And yeah, so please don't lose momentum now that we've read the book and this chapter, this part of our, you know, experience is over. Now it's time to kind of, you know, like actually, you know, get our, you know, hands dirty and get, you know, dig in.
Literally.
Yeah, literally.
Hands-
like if
hands
anybody wants to get
Peating.
muddy.
Peat, not dirt.
Right.
So if you didn't join us for our land use meeting, which was a really energizing and engaging meeting, you should definitely check out the Peatland chapter, which is on page 122 in the land use chapter of Drawdown, and you can find it online as well. Yeah, we won't have any official homework between our meetings, but this would be a great time to just sort of get the stoke level up about peatlands and yeah, do some initial research into why a lot of people are so excited about them.
I wanted to just once again thank all these solution champions. It was obvious they put so much research into those solutions, and that was awesome. I mean, I'm really inspired that this is going to continue and lead to more solutions after we get this one in place. So really thanks again for you guys stepping up to the plate and doing it so well. It's really impressive to see.
Yeah, and I think part of our jobs too is to just continue to network and create this community of people who are actively willing to put time and energy into climate solutions and solutions that make our communities stronger and healthier. And so I think another function of Drawdown will be just as sort of a networking and a sharing group for opportunities for solutions across the board. So we'll start to create kind of a system for formalizing that so everyone can share whenever something comes up.
So we move from Drawdown to Power Up.
Mm-hmm.
Get moving.
And if anybody does have resources between now and the next meeting, please be sure to share it on the Slack, or you can send it to the Homer Drawdown email or to any of us, and we'll be sure that everybody else gets it. So if you feel inclined to do some research, or you already know some research, you know, please send it our way.
I've been somewhat inactive on Slack in the last couple months due to busyness, but because now that we've decided our solution and we have now all the time and excitement to start gathering resources, I will vamp up the Slack page and make it easier for everyone to share resources with each other and network, easier to navigate and whatnot.
So we'll send you that link in a follow-up email. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your Thursday evening. Really excited.
I think this is the first time we've ended our meeting somewhat on time too, so that's awesome.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
All of you have worked so hard. Thank you.
Well done, everyone.
Thanks, Rika.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So appreciate you.